Welcome everyone to day 6 of the Wisdom of Birth. I always feel very excited when I say that because it started occurring to me today that after you give birth, you have a postpartum. And I am so looking forward to my postpartum after giving birth to the Wisdom of Birth and getting my nest back and just kind of coming back into myself. Yeah, it's quite a sustenance of energy. But we're good. We're getting energized by everyone and everyone's inputs and just the amazing, unique, so fully inspiring passion that the speakers bring through, and the magic it's also brought to this course that's connecting with everyone's. I mean, some of the feedback I can't actually I have to just sit and like hold it a bit. There's so much to share from what you people are sharing with me about the synchronicities in this course. And this is a very special day for me, because if there was ever a way to talk about my start, for whatever that's worth, in midwifery, I have to speak about Marianne. and because of that, I was just thinking this morning about us meeting and me sitting in my car, phoning from, like, the very first cell phone I had was like this Alcatel, or I don't know, some very old phone. Like, loading time, I was very like austere, so I wouldn't buy myself cell phone time. So I especially bought phone time, and I was sitting outside the office and I phoned you and I made the appointment, and you could only see me the following week or something. So I had to wait a whole week. And the person I'd phoned before had kind of said, oh, you can contact me in a few weeks when you're 16 weeks pregnant. But for me, I had decided after so long of, for so many different reasons, not being able to share my pregnancy until 12 weeks, that I was just ready to be absolutely present and accountable with this baby. And I wanted to see a midwife, not because I wanted to know if I was okay, but because I wanted to acknowledge this being inside me. And so Marianne and I started a very, very deep and meaningful relationship, because and I'm not going to keep this too long, but Marianne has been such a crutch for me to get through medicine, really. I just remember coming and crying literally on your couch while your clients would come in and out. I'd hang out with Harry, the dog, and and process my internal feelings about just wanting to be a midwife but studying medicine, and all the challenges that brought in my relationship and my parenting of my baby. And Marianne's just been such a mother for me throughout. And the immensity of your approach and your love and your learning for this, and the way you intertwine it with the clinical skills, but you hold that sacredness, has been, you really are my guru in this.
Can I respond?
I don't know. Okay, yes, of course you can.
Am I allowed to respond? It's quite an emotional moment.
Sorry, I didn't want to take over, and I was trying to get rid of all these emotions before, but sometimes you actually have to stop apologizing for just feeling stuff. And so, yeah, can respond.
Well, I'm really grateful to have had the opportunity to mentor you, and to know that I've passed the torch on. Yesterday, I wasn't feeling too great, and I took myself off to the GP, and I had checked my blood pressure. It was over 110. And I thought, gosh, if I had a pregnant woman in my office, I'd admit her straight away. So I went off to the GP, my GP, and got something to help my blood pressure settle a bit. And it's just it's the process of aging. You know, we adopt our bodies and we abuse our bodies for many years. I've abused my body in being a workaholic, and yeah, perhaps not cared for myself enough, but that is also, it's part of my learning curve. It's part of my destiny. It's what was given to me. And so my poor little body is struggling, and I'm having to learn to slow down and be grateful for the things that I do have. So thank you for that wonderful, wonderful burst of confidence from you, and love and respect, and it makes me feel really good. Thank you.
Now that we've opened the love bubble of birth, which is what Marianne does, Shasta, I'm so excited to ask you to introduce Marianne, because I'm not the only one who's been touched by you. And South Africa can resonate with that, at least South Africa.
Yeah.
Shasta.
Thank you. Yes, Marianne Littlejohn. She can be outspoken, is incredibly well known midwife in South Africa. I had heard Marianne's name spoken so many times with great love and so much respect, many, many times before I finally got to meet Marianne. And in part because her work spans 4 decades, but also in part because she has just touched thousands of lives. And it's incredibly rare to have a midwife with such long-standing experience that is still in practice. And Marianne, I believe that you may have been saying for the last 10 years that you're going to start slowing down. But we're incredibly blessed today to have somebody with her experience share her knowledge with us. And we know that in this field, experience is everything. These deep wells of knowledge bring, and all of those years of experience bring so much. And I've been privileged to witness Marianne at work in a home birth setting. And one was a breech birth, a very memorable birth in the Drakensberg, that when we talk about intuition, this woman, it's incredible, because we had not phoned, and I had been sitting with the woman for a few days in the Drakensberg, and we had not phoned Marianne yet to say that she was in labor. But what happened? The woman's waters broke. Nobody had said anything to Marianne yet. And then when we did phone her, she goes, no, I'm here. I'm in a guest cottage down the road. Like, of course she is. So in a very short time, through observation, I learned so much. So I personally find it enormously exciting too that Marianne worked as a research assistant with one of my personal heroes, Dr. Nils Bergman. And today she's going to share with us some of the more important but lesser spoken tools that a birth keeper needs to have in her back pocket. So I'm really excited for our session today. Thank you so much, Marianne.
Thank you, Shasta. It's good to see you again. And you brought back memories of that amazing birth. Oh my gosh, it was one of the highlights of my life. And I watched the video. It was a breech birth, and it was a mum who was having her 4th baby. So she had given birth successfully several times, 3 times. And she was very confident and determined. And thank goodness for that, because that's what you need. You need to know that all points and all the ducks are in a row, as it were, clinically and physically and mentally, emotionally. And she was, yeah. So and the baby ended up being, was it 4.4 kilos?
She was a big baby.
She was 4 point something kilos, between either 4.2 or 4.4, and a breech. So the birth took, it was about 15 minutes. The birth itself, from the time that the buttocks presented to the time that the head was born. And the big thing with a breech birth is that you can't panic. You have to wait for the mother, and you have to be calm. And if you produce adrenaline in any way, and the mother picks it up and becomes afraid, then you're in trouble. So I have learned that art, and I think it's probably why I have high blood pressure now, is inside on one level, I would be experiencing a roller coaster of sensations and emotions, because I have clairsentience, so I identify with the baby physically as well as with the mother. And obviously I have my own responses due to my own birth and my own upbringing, and that milieu is happening on a very deep level, on a primal level inside my body. But on the surface, I'm rationalizing, I'm thinking, I'm talking to myself, not to the mother, but silently, and calming myself down so that I don't transmit this electro or piezo electricity or electromagnetic energy or etheric energy, whatever you would wish to call it, to the mother. And as a result, she is able to concentrate on the task at hand, which is to birth her baby. And she did so wonderfully. And the funny thing is, I spoke to her a short while ago, and I asked her how she felt about it. She said, well, just as well I didn't know anything about breech birth, because I don't think I would do it again. So on that note, I'd just like to say thank you to everyone who is present. There's some of you I can see, and some of you I can't see. Tanika and Nikita, Chloe, Bridget, Malherba, Sophia, Gari, Shasta, Manjari, Priya. Are you from India?
No, I'm in Germany, but I'm connected to...
That's right. Gari said you're in Germany. And Rukman Sivaswamy. There's some wonderful names here. Chloe Russell, Mayvani Lavere, welcome to all of you. Leah, Luce, Lisa, Karuna, and even a few more. I can see Niha and Sneha Bakal. Wow, I really am privileged to have an audience of people from all over the world. I'm going to jump right in, because I think we're going to get immersed in the whole topic of intuition and birth, intuition and midwifery. And I want to start off with some theory, because intuition has many definitions, as we will find out, and it will take us deeper and deeper into the field of extrasensory perception. The modern definitions that we have, or fairly recent definitions that we have, come from, firstly, Rudolf Steiner, who was writing in the 1940s, and secondly, Jung, who was about 10 years later. And Jung has kind of become the very popular person to turn to when looking for direction with regard to intuition. And it's interesting, because Jung was a doctor, he became a psychiatrist, and he was materialistic. He was not religious. He came from a very religious family. His father was a pastor, but he himself, he didn't like to think that he was an atheist. He never said, I'm an atheist, but he could not bow down to God, to the idea of God. And his psychiatric studies led him to trying to understand humans and why they do what they do, how they think. And he coined some really amazing terminologies, definitions, concepts that we use generally in our conversations these days. So he has influenced the culture in a very, very big way. Interesting thing about Jung is that he said the intuition came from the unconscious. Okay, he coined the term collective unconscious. So he discovered that in his studies of psychiatric illness, people with illnesses, that there were certain levels of brain function, but he did dissect bodies, but he was still quite premature in his knowledge of neurology and neurological function. But he understood that there were archetypes and that they were common to everybody. For instance, the Great Mother is an archetype. And, you know, we use a lot of symbology around the Great Mother, goddesses of nature, nurture, and the harvest, life, death, seasons, myths, dreams. What are the other archetypes that you can think of? Is there anybody? I would like this to be an interactive session. So anyone who can come up with another archetype.
Everyone can just unmute and say it. I will say the hero. Shasta also said the hero. We are connecting wavelengths. Right. Shasta and I.
Right.
The Joker is the Joker one.
Yes, the Joker, the fool, the Joker and the fool.
Prostitute, the prostitute is one.
Prostitute, yes. Keep going, you're doing well.
The victim.
Yes, there would be like a Greek
martyr.
Sorry,
martyr.
Yes, yes. Then
the sage.
What about the hermit? Yeah. Sage, the hermit.
Wounded
and
healer.
What about feminine ones? Sorry.
The wounded healer.
The wounded healer is another archetype. Yes. What about feminine ones?
Nehas, I love your one that you wrote in the chat. Neha said lover.
Lover. Yes, that's not Persephone, Venus. Venus is a symbol of the lover. Yeah.
That's another.
Yes. And what about the crone?
Yes, that's the one was on my tongue. I kept wanting to say the crow.
Yes, that's where I am. The crone. Moving into my cronehood.
And also queen.
The queen.
Queen is also an archetype.
Yes, the queen and the empress. Hera is the Greek term for the queen or the great mother. And what about the maiden?
I love the way they pop up at the same time in different places. Chloe also wrote down maiden.
Yeah. And the creator, the artist, is another archetype.
Right. The artist. And what about Dionysus? I mean, none of us would be having children without Dionysus. The lover, the masculine, the young man in his full strength, with muscles and attractiveness. Yes, the priestess, the high priest and the high priestess.
Caregiver.
The giver.
Caregiver.
Caregiver. Yeah, that's more like
The nurse.
the mother. Yeah, that's a form of the mother. Yeah, that's amazing. Well, thank you for those, and keep them in mind, because we all operate and it helps us to verbalize. The problem with intuition is very, very difficult to find words, because intuition is wordless. And so Jung was great at finding words and expressing words to describe his definition of intuition. He did reject all metaphysical interpretations of man's situation. So he defined everything in terms of the unconscious and the conscious and the collective unconscious. So the archetypes fall very much into the collective unconscious. And it's a very helpful framework to approach people. So you when your couple first comes into your rooms and you see them, you see how they're dressed, you see how they do their hair, you see whether they wear makeup or not. Do they have high-heeled shoes or flat sandals? Do they wear long robes or miniskirts? Is the man, you know, how tall is he? Is he a short man or a tall man? Is he a muscled man? Does he exercise? All of those sorts of observations are subliminal observations that you make, but you're not always conscious of them. And you make those observations and you adapt your style of relating accordingly. Jung said that everything was psychological, and it's very useful to perceive or to think within Jung's framework, because we live in a tangible world and we are sensate. God is part of the unconscious, which I believe as well. God is part of us. I may expand a little bit on what Jung thinks, but he's right. And he also developed the 4 personality types. Who knows what they are? So who knows what the Myers-Briggs test is? So one of your homework
extroversion, you know, you're either an ENTJ, for example. So that would be you get energized by people, you love creative ideas, you're quite logical, and you like deadlines. So that would be the ENTJ.
Yes. Yeah. And that's you.
No, that's my husband.
Your husband. That's why you know it so well. You see, so here you are, you've gone and done a Myers-Briggs test. You've got your husband to do a Myers-Briggs test. Any one of you can go online. This is your homework, and find a Myers-Briggs test, which you can do. And it changes a little bit, but it gives you a good reflection. So there are 4 basic personality types, and those are thinking, feeling, sensing, and perceiving, according to Jung. Thinking, feeling, intuition, and sensing. That's what he. So yes, that's interesting. I made a mistake there because Rudolf Steiner is the one who talks about perceiving, but Jung has termed thinking and feeling, intuition and sensing. And Jung states that the intuition comes from the unconscious, whereas Rudolf Steiner states that the intuition has to be conscious. So that's a very interesting difference between the 2 structures or frameworks. Thinking and feeling are rational ways of being or rational styles, and intuition and sensing are more like instant knowledge styles. And he reckons that they both come from the sensing, which is your supposedly your 5 senses, and your intuition comes from the unconscious, and it comes up in a whole way, in a complete way. So it's something you don't necessarily have to think about. It's an immediate understanding. Whereas Rudolf Steiner, he writes that intuition increases the self-awareness. So there are 4 personality types. Please remember them, write them down according to Jung. It's thinking and feeling, and intuition, and sensing, which is related to your 5 senses: vision, hearing, taste, smell, and touch. It's a very rudimentary definition of what the 5 senses are. We'll come to that later. I want to read a little excerpt from the literature, because intuition is spoken about in literature, and this literature is interesting. I don't know how many of you have read Sherlock Holmes, but there's a lovely description of what intuition might mean. So Sherlock Holmes worked with the good doctor. Sherlock Holmes was created by Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, and the following paragraphs represent the introduction both to Dr. Watson and to the reader of The Great Detective. But what do you mean, I said, that without leaving your room you can unravel some knot which other men can make nothing of, although they have seen every detail for themselves? Quite so. I have a kind of intuition that way. Now and again a case turns up which is a little bit more complex. Then I have to bustle about and see things with my own eyes. You see, I have a lot of special knowledge which I apply to the problem and which facilitates matters wonderfully. These rules of deduction laid down in that article, which aroused your scorn, are invaluable to me in practical work. Observation with me is second nature. You appeared to be surprised when I told you on our first meeting that you had come from Afghanistan. You were told, no doubt, nothing of the sort. I knew you came from Afghanistan. From long habit, the train of thought ran so swiftly through my mind that I arrived at the conclusion without being conscious of intermediate steps. There were such steps, however. The train of reasoning ran. Here is a gentleman of a medical type, but with the air of a military man, clearly an army doctor then. He has just come from the tropics, for his face is dark, and that is not the natural tint of his skin, for his wrists are fair. He had undergone hardship and sickness, as his haggard face says clearly. His left arm has been injured. He holds it in a stiff and unnatural manner. Where in the tropics could an English army doctor have seen much hardship and got his arm wounded? Clearly, in Afghanistan. The whole train of thought did not occupy a second. I then remarked that you came from Afghanistan and you were quite astonished. I think that's such a wonderful description of how an intuition might come, that you're actually observing all these external minutiae of features, and you're putting it together in your mind, and then you're making a deduction. And it's not irrational. It's not taken from the ether. It's a knowing. He knew, and he was right. You see, he says, I have a lot of special knowledge which I apply to the problem and which facilitates matters wonderfully. Those rules of deduction laid down in that article, which aroused your scorn, are invaluable to me in practical work. Observation with me is second nature. So let's just bring that back to midwifery. How acute are your powers of observation? How much do you think about each client? Is she short? Is she tall? How does she dress? Is she overweight? Is she underweight? How big is her husband? What is the genetic makeup of these people? This is all scientific. This is all scientific facts. How does she feel about herself? How does he feel about herself? How were they born? So those are questions you can ask. How were they born? What is their ancestral history in terms of birth? What is the geographical area they come from? And why is that important? Why is it important to know where a person comes from? I can tell you why it's important to know in KwaZulu-Natal, because the geography, the topography, and the quality of the soil in this area is deficient in many minerals, and particularly in iodine. And iodine serves the thyroid function. And so what we see in a lot of in this area is hypothyroidism and goiters. That's one of the reasons why the South African government put iodine in the salts many decades ago. These are observations, and when you are critical of your observations, when you take the time to reflect on the observations, even meditate on the observations, find some quiet space where you can ponder over your immediate response to that person. What was the feeling when you met them? Did your heart open up wide, or did you shrink back? Did the hairs on your arms stand on end? Did you get hairs standing up on the back of your neck? Were they responsive to you? And so on and so on. So these are things which can be applied to your practice in a very practical way. Let's just talk a little bit to compare about Rudolf Steiner. Rudolf Steiner was a very focused man. He grew up in a very lonely way, and he applied himself to thinking about life, and his writings are obscure. I must be very honest with you. I haven't read a lot of Rudolf Steiner. I prefer to read about Rudolf Steiner or read books describing his work written by other people. But he also, and he was prior to Jung, which is really interesting because Jung has become the very famous man. His work has been incorporated into our Western culture, whereas Rudolf Steiner is seen as a little bit cultish and not adopted. You know, his thinking has kind of remained in a very secluded group of people. But he wrote a book called The Philosophy of Freedom, Thinking as a Spiritual Path. He maintains that knowledge is an individual responsibility, and as a midwife, it's our responsibility to know everything about everything as much as we possibly can. So get onto the Cochrane database, go and study those articles. If you have somebody who comes in to your practice and there's something about them that's off, go home, do the research. He also defines 4 personality types, and with the introversion and the extroversion that Jung adds, you actually can have up to, well, there's 32 in the Myers-Briggs tests, the 32 personality combinations, but you could have more. Rudolf Steiner defines thinking, feeling, intuition, and observation or perception. And he maintains that every person has the responsibility to maintain a conscious study of their cognitive processes. So how you think, why you think the way you do, why you act the way you do. When things happen to you, how do you respond? Why do you respond that way? So that you are increasing your level of self-awareness and your level of self-regulation. He says that observation actually precedes thinking, but it is both external, like observing an object, and it is internal, observing your internal processes, how you feel, how you think. And he says the thinking rather than your intuition is unconscious, which is very, very interesting turnabout of the terms. So Rudolf Steiner maintains that the thinking is unconscious and needs to be made conscious, and that the intuition is more present on the surface of a person's personality. So for intuition to become useful to you, you need to immerse yourself in the vocabulary of archetypes and symbols, and immerse yourself in language that can describe the things that you are feeling. We realize ourselves through becoming and being. Interesting thing about indigenous people is they live by what they observe, and indigenous people operate very much on a level of intuitive thinking. So there's an example of a man who was a firefighter in Montana in 1947. And they were fighting the fire in one spot, and he observed that the fire had started further down, and that they would be trapped in the fire and were likely to die. And there was one escape route, and that was to run up the hill to the top of the hill and try and escape the fire that way. The problem with a very raging fire is that it moves far faster than human beings can run. And he had Dodge, his name is Dodge, Wag Dodge, he observed this in a flash of a second. He had these thoughts and he made a decision, and that decision was to wet his handkerchief in the stream and to lie down on the ground. First of all, he lit a fire. He lit a fire in front of him so that it blew back towards him. And then he lay down on the hot ashes with a wet handkerchief over his face. And when the fire raged towards him, it jumped over the spot where he had lit a smaller fire and lay down in the ashes, and he survived. And the guys who ran, the rest of the team who tried to run to the top of the hill, 2 of them got to the top of the hill and survived, and the others all died in the fire. And you know, with indigenous people too, they have to be highly intuitive of danger. So it's a kind of hypervigilance. And if you live in a forest, you're not living in a city, you're not exposed to the constant noise of cars or machinery or factories. And so your hearing can develop even more acutely to the sounds that surround you. And during my research for this sharing with you, I researched about the savant children, or children who had grown up without human contact. So children who were raised by wolves and monkeys and raised with a bear. One of them was raised with a bear. Another one was raised by wild dogs. And these children, when they were found by so-called civilized people, were unable to speak and communicate with human beings. They would walk on all fours. They could run fast on all fours as the animals they were running with. They could hear things that these civilized people couldn't hear. They could smell things. They would, the one that grew up with wolves couldn't eat raw meat, couldn't eat cooked meat. He had to have raw meat, and he would go down on the ground and devour it. And it was just a very interesting diversion for me to go, and in my searching for what is intuition, these children had intuition for things that we've lost our intuition for, because they were exposed to the forest. They had to learn to listen. They had to learn to see. They had to learn to sense things. I mean, how do you not get bitten by a snake in a forest unless you become hypersensitive? And that's something to do with the skin, with the electrical magnetic energy that we emit as human beings. And so they would have developed that sense. I want to stop a little bit and ask you to participate again and give me a list or describe to me different kinds of senses. And I'm talking about physical senses that we assume a baby is born with the senses of hearing, and we check for hearing, we check for vision, taste we do when we put them on the breast or we give them milk to drink, touch, do they respond, and smell. And just those 5 senses are incredibly important to the baby's survival. And so from the moment he is born, he's imbibing at a rapid rate all the information that his senses, his acute senses, are going to give him. Where that breast is, what it smells like. Does it smell familiar, a bit like amniotic fluid? Does he sense in other ways? So think of other ways that a baby might be sensing.
Well, I'm not sure. I'm just thinking.
Yes.
Would the baby be sensing the energy of the people in the room, whether they worried or afraid or happy or relaxed?
So the baby is very good at picking up on emotions, telepathic sensing. So I would call that telepathic sensing. Does the baby have, is that hormonal? The baby's has so much adrenaline in his body, and his pituitary gland is very active. The endocrine system is active, and is there a wave that he is aware of that is coming from another person in the room? Absolutely. So I would definitely put that down, telepathic sensing.
I would say auric sensing.
Auric sensing, yeah. So is that related to vision, or is that related to the skin? Is that related to the skin?
That energy? It's the energy shield. That's, picking up on other people's energies, just like adding on to the previous comments. Yeah.
Okay. Beautiful. Write that down. What else?
I would say presence, like they can feel when they are alone, even when they're asleep. Like you can be...
So they're aware of the presence of another person.
Yeah.
Let's just try, just go back a little bit. I mean, those are all valid. I just want to come back to the physical. Physical sensory faculties. So we know that the hearing, well, we now know, we didn't know many hundreds of years ago what it looked like, but we now know there's a cochlea and there's an eardrum, and that the ears are specifically for listening. Can you think of other sensing faculties that a baby might have.
Well, smell, they would smell everything.
Very, very acute sense of smell.
Mm.
Yeah.
What about fear?
I beg your pardon?
Fear.
Feel, is that in touch?
Oh,
You're talking about,
okay.
you're talking about touch?
Yes.
Yes. And what about pain?
Pain, yes.
Pain. So the senses for pain are acute. You know, you can touch a baby gently and he's maybe feeling pain. Or move him in a way that he doesn't enjoy it.
Babies feel wet.
Wetness.
Wetness.
Wetness, yes, they don't like being wet and they don't like sitting in their poo either. So, I mean, that is such an interesting thing to talk about a little bit, because most people assume it's quite okay for a baby to sit in a nappy. You know, we put a nappy and we catch the poo and we ignore it until it's 4 hours later. And so for 4 hours, the poor little mite has to be wet or sit in a nappy that's full of poo, and they hate it. And then people are wondering why the baby is crying. And then, of course, we have elimination communication. So babies, it's not that they consciously learn, it is a knowing. So if you hold them over the basin at regular intervals, they will poop and they will pee. And it's not difficult to do. So that is also, some mothers are very in tune with their babies and they know when their babies are going to pee and poo, but most mothers don't cultivate that awareness. So that is a kind of intuition. It's a kind of knowing that the mother has for her infant. Okay, I'm also going to talk about balance. The baby has been balanced inside the mother in fluid, but when it comes out, it feels completely unbalanced. And the baby wants to be the right way up after birth. He swims in a water birth up towards his mother, not towards the midwife. Of course, midwives love water births because we think the baby's swimming towards us. But no, if you leave a baby alone in the water, it will turn and swim towards the mother. How does it know that? So there's that sense of balance and mouthing. You know, we think of taste as a sensation, a physiological sensation, but mouthing is also, a baby mouths, and through the mouthing and on through toddlerhood learns about the shape of an object, the texture of an object, the taste of an object, the material density of an object, etc., etc. So mouthing for little ones is extremely important. And that baby is absorbing, so that when you put a word to what he's doing, he's learning the language, he's learning all these sensations about what this particular object is. And later on, he doesn't have to think about it. It's intuitive. Suckling and licking. Also, suckling. So with suckling particularly, now I know I'm talking about babies here, but we can extrapolate from babies to human beings. But babies are somehow, they're easier to talk about because everything is so obvious. So the suckling and the licking and the latching and the suckling and the swallowing, it's a learned behavior. And it's quite difficult to do because the baby has to breathe. So if there's any mucus in the airway or mucus lodged at the back of the throat or any problem with the lungs or wetness of the lungs or infection of the lungs, baby's going to have problem breathing. But we may not notice it until the baby can't suckle. So if babies have problems latching and suckling, that is a sign that there's another issue at play. So for instance, we have this high rate, I don't know if it happened too much in the past, but certainly it seems to be very prevalent, these TR gene modification. As you can hear, I love science. My father was a vet. My mother's the most practical person in the world, and very materialistic and very observant of animal behavior, which then she extrapolates to human behavior. So the suckling, the latching, the suckling, the baby the rhythm is to latch, to suck, to swallow, and breathe, and the synchronicity between the mother and the baby. So breastfeeding can be very difficult for a mother and a baby pair because they are not synchronized, because the mother has other issues. Maybe it's just practical, like a nipple that's flat or inverted, or the breasts are very large and she can't manage the breast and the baby, and so latching is a problem. And that flow of relationship, the latching, the suckling, the swallowing, the breathing, the rhythm, and the quantity and the speed and the ease of the mother's giving to the baby can either be harmonious or disharmonious. My first baby, I had so much milk, I could have fed some giants. And he would be overwhelmed. He would latch, and then suddenly my milk would come rushing down, squirting out the other breast, rush into his mouth, and he would choke. And that causes a huge amount of frustration with the baby. And I was green, you know, I thought I was doing a good job. I was doing the best job I could at the time. But the interesting thing is that we still have frustration in our relationship, because no one could help me at that point modulate my responses to the baby and his need for harmony in the sucking process. I did eventually learn how to slow down the flow and feed him in such a way that he had power rather than being the victim. But these things, these archetypes happen very, very early on in a way, because they are endemic in the relationships between a baby and his first caregiver or her first caregiver, either the mother or someone else. And we've spoken about smell, vision, and I just want to stop there on vision. Somebody said aura, that the babies can sense the aura. Now, some people can see aura. A baby doesn't know what he's seeing for the first few weeks of his life. And gradually things come into focus because he knows what he is seeing. So the first thing he looks for is the mother's eyes, and he determines through her voice, her smell, and other mannerisms that this is his mother. He recognizes her, and he memorizes, or she memorizes, the mother's face. And then that becomes the first knowing. So the mother is then the universe, the world. And gradually, as the child grows, the words and the knowing is put to the vision of what he's seeing, the object that he is perceiving through his sight. And that to me is fascinating. So what does a baby see? Does a baby see auras? You know, some people do see auras, and they continue to be able to see auras. That's why we keep the light dim at a birth, because the light itself is so overwhelming for a baby. Babies can see acutely from birth. That's what I believe. And we are the ones who don't understand what they are perceiving. Then there's telepathic sensing, and electromagnetic awareness, that we lose as adults, that we don't pay attention to it. Okay, now we're going to dive. How are you all? How are you all doing? Are you getting tired? Do you need to stretch your legs a little bit? Take off your shoes and put them on Mother Earth. Put your feet on Mother Earth. Are you bored? Talk to me. Talk to me, someone.
I'm loving it, and I'm loving your role.
Beautiful.
Me
Just
too. It's very interesting listening.
Not
I'm
falling
loving the
asleep.
scientific side.
Who's loving the scientific side?
Lisa, I'm loving the scientific side because I come from a very energetic side, and so
Okay.
I work from a heart center and work with the auras and the energy and everything. So I'm loving this real side as well, the psychological side of it.
Well, now you're going to be in your element, because we're going to come to this other side. And yeah, I love to be scientific. But science is it's also limited. And right at the present moment in time, scientific statements and scientific discoveries are paid for by the wealthy, which then brings into question the whole issue of bias. So a lot of what I've learned, I'm really, really grateful for the Cochrane database, for all the studies that have been done on women and birth, and how women's lives can be saved, and how babies' lives can be saved. But there's a conflict. There is a conflict, because the medicines that are being paid for right at the present time, there's no judgment here of anyone who disagrees with me, but they are part of a depopulation agenda, and that's because we've interfered. That's because we've interfered with birth. And so what we have now is a genetic makeup. The genetic anomalies in the human population are growing, because they are saved, they're allowed to survive. And I never forget the story of an indigenous group in the Amazon, and this anthropologist went to live with them, and he completely immersed himself in their way of life. So he lived like them in the hut, and he became accepted, and he learned some of the language that they spoke, and he would sit around the fire with them at night and participate in their fire ceremonies and their dances and so on. But then he describes this event where a woman is pregnant, and they are one of the few tribes that we know of that gave birth in the river. So they lived next to one of the tributaries of the Amazon, and they gave birth in the river. And this woman went to the river, and she'd been in labor for days, and she went into the water, and she became very, very distressed and groaning and shouting and screaming. And a group of these indigenous people gathered on the shore and watched and waited. And the anthropologist became increasingly agitated and asked one of the elders, why aren't you going in to help her? She needs help. She needs to be assisted, and so that she can live and the baby can live. And I know what to do, and I want to go in and help her. And they grabbed his arm and told him off and said to him, you will not help her. She has to do this on her own. And he was beside himself, but they wouldn't let him. They constrained him, and he had to watch. And she died. She didn't manage to expel her baby, and she floated off down the river, and that was the end of that. And he was very, very upset, and sat around the fire later on. I mean, he couldn't bring himself to speak. He didn't know what to do with himself. And then later on, once he'd calmed down, he sat around the fire with the elders and asked them why they didn't assist her. And they said to him, look, anyone who gives birth in our group, in our way of life, they have to be able to do it themselves. If she gives birth to a child that needs assistance, that child might need assistance for the rest of its life. We don't have the resources for that. And he had to concede. He had to concede that they were right. But it goes against the grain of everything we're taught in medicine and in nursing, and we take oaths to preserve life. Which brings us to the present day, where there's all sorts of subterfuges going on around medicine, and people who are, because they've been taught in the Western way, can't think in any other way. And it's the same with birth. I mean, the birth, the paradigm at the moment, the Western medical paradigm, has taken women out of their homes, away from their families, separated families, and put women into hospitals where they can be saved, but at what cost to the rest of society, at what cost to themselves, at what cost to their children. And children, babies are now technologized from birth, from before birth, and bond to that technology very quickly. It doesn't take a baby 2 minutes to want a cell phone after seeing one for the first time. Why? Because we are fixated. I was going to say fuxated. we are fixated and fuxated on our technology, and technology has a place, but we cannot allow it to remove our humanity. And that's the problem that happens in hospitals. Cesarean sections reduce fertility, among other things, and make giving birth a very dangerous thing, as well as save lives. Let's not put that down. But we're going to dive in, and I'm going to ask you the questions. What are the 5 clear capacities? Let's start with those. What are the 5 extrasensory perceptions that people can have?
Clairvoyance.
Yes.
Clairsentience.
Audio. Oh, sorry.
Both clairaudience and clairsentience. Yes. Other two a little bit more remote. You got any ideas?
Synesthesia. When you
What's that?
synesthesia, when you can see sound or feel.
Oh, right.
Or
Synesthesia. Okay, very interesting.
synesthesia.
Okay, I didn't have that one. Yeah, that's what's that author's name who writes about he's a psychiatrist, and he writes about his clients who have all these extraordinary abilities to perceive things. The name will come to me.
The old one who wrote about the top hat.
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah. We'll come to it. What about claircognizance? So just a knowing, claircognizance, and
a gut feeling. Is that the same?
Could be. What about clairessence? Smelling. I can smell when someone is sick. If someone comes close to me and I smell them, I will know whether they're healthy or sick. So that's 5. Then there's clairgustance, which I think is what you related to, what you mentioned, that feeling in the pit of your stomach. Then there are a whole lot others. So you can write them down. I'm just going to run through them and we can talk through them. So telekinesis. You know what telekinesis is? So it's the ability to move things around without touching them. Telekinesis. Ergokinesis is the ability to influence the movement of electricity. So I think I have a little bit of that. Obviously it's not something I've developed, but I can't wear a watch, and that's an old one. I can't wear a hand watch, and I definitely can't wear a digital watch because they all die. Or they misshow time. So there's an electrical current coming from me that affects them in a random way. What about levitation? Okay, I've tried. I haven't been successful. I keep on imagining that I'm going to be like these Buddhist monks who learned to levitate, but not in this lifetime, I don't think. Materialization, the ability to materialize objects in the presence of another person. Psychic surgery, we all know about psychic surgery, where they put their hands into the abdomen and pull out all the darums and all the evil spirits, and the person gets up and he's healed. How does that work? Shape-shifting. Shape-shifting is the ability to merge. Now, I was speaking to my psychologist about this. It's both a gift and a survival mechanism. So I was complaining actually to my psychologist that, you know, I tend to recede into the background when I'm with people. People just don't see me. And sometimes they don't hear me either. And I'm there and I'm thinking, how can you not see me or hear me? I am so loud and I'm so big and I have such a big presence and such a big aura, but they don't see me. And I'm like, what is that? You know, and it's something that can hurt, but it's also a survival mechanism, because if there's an aggressor in your environment and you have the ability to not be seen, you're going to survive, aren't you? You have the ability to shapeshift or to disappear. Yeah, it was an interesting process just working through that. Then there's the issue of thoughtography. Now that's a new one to me. That you can think about something and it will print itself on the paper. Yeah, that's a new one. Xenoglossy. Who knows what xenoglossy is? I'm not talking about speaking in tongues. Maybe that is a kind of xenoglossy, but xenoglossy is the ability to speak in different languages. Yes, I'm reading this. Who's this from? Shasta. Reading body language in adults to figure out how to behave, how to be quiet or unseen, being able to viscerally disappear, even though very present, is a good skill to have. Yeah, interesting. Oliver Sacks, there we go. Who? Gorry, yes, Oliver Sacks, the man who mistook his wife for a hat. Thank you for that. That wasn't one of the, I didn't go and look him up before I came today. Enidia, what is Enidia? The Indian wise people managed to do this. They survive without eating or drinking for months and months and sometimes years. Now, we have the capacity under pristine circumstances to survive without eating, okay? Because we breathe in pollen. So we have to live in an area that is untouched by human desecrated by humans, where the pollen and the plants are in abundance and where the natural climate is able to be itself. And then we breathe in the pollen, and pollen is protein, and we will survive for years without eating. Drinking, I'm not so sure of. It could be related to the same, the moisture in the air, the quantity of the moisture in the air. And obviously, you're not going to be running the comrades without eating or drinking. You're going to be meditating in a cave. I'm going to tell you another, like a tree, it absorbs pollens and moisture to survive. There you go. There's another wonderful story about this very wise man. And often, like in African culture, in Western culture, we've suppressed all this information. But in African culture, we have the sangomas and the shamans. And now we are relearning it by aligning ourselves with shamanic knowledge from Peru and from the Amazon and the sangomas. I have a client who is also a sangoma, and this man lived in a village high in the Himalayas, and he was a bit odd. You know, he didn't really fit in with the rest of the village. He didn't have a wife, he didn't have children, and everyone would give him alms, and he would help various families in the fields. And then one day he just left, and he went higher and higher and higher up the mountain, and he found a cave, and he devoted himself to a life of stillness and meditation. And he would look down over the valley and see the village below and watch people. And he lived, he was visited by the mountain lion, who growled at him fiercely for a few times and then accepted his presence. And he was visited by the bear, and he was visited by many other little animals who would visit him on a regular basis. And he just absorbed and communicated silently and meditated. And then one day he was visited more frequently by the animals, and he thought they were going to sleep in the cave with him, but they came to him and they paced around the cave, and then they left. And the bear came and sat with him, and then got up, and then sat down, and then got up, and then walked off, and then came back, and then kept on trying to communicate with him. And he just watched, and you know, his mind was blank in a meditative state. And then lots and lots of little animals and the birds and everybody came to him in the cave. And after a few days, he suddenly woke up. He had an enlightenment moment. He suddenly understood, and he ran down to the village as fast as he could. And he ran to all the houses, and he woke everybody up, and he ran to the fields, and he kept on telling them, you have to leave. Grab your belongings. Don't worry to bring anything. Just your clothes and just come with me. Come, you have to leave the village. And he rushed around like a madman and managed to get everybody to safety. And within half an hour, a huge avalanche came down the valley and flattened the village. So what was that? Was that clairaudience? Was it claircognizance? Was it powers of observation? He didn't do anything. He sat there for years, 20 years. And we're talking about a long time, and meditated. And that was the purpose of his life, was to save his village. And have the knowing to do so. If he hadn't gone up the mountain, if he hadn't meditated, if he hadn't become one with nature, with God, with himself, he wouldn't have known. So the path to any of these extrasensory perceptions, it's not an easy one. It's not an easy one. And I speak from experience. We're not going to get it right all the time. We're going to come back to that in a minute. I want to talk a little bit about dowsing, how some people can dowse for water or dowse for other minerals under the surface of the earth. Psychometry, to know things by touching an object or by touching someone. So I have a little bit of psychometry. Precognition, premonitions. The worst thing about having anything that is psychic or extrasensory perception is that it doesn't make the life, it doesn't mean that the life of the person who has extrasensory perception is going to be, firstly, easy, and secondly, they don't have extrasensory perception about themselves. So you often make terrible mistakes and then look back and think, oh my, how could I have done that? How could I have made that decision? You know, because we are human and we are here to learn. Even if we have extrasensory perceptiveness, it is not ours to own. It is given to us. And some of us have some capacities and other people develop different capacities. And that is how we help each other. Psychometry, precognition, remote viewing. So remote viewing, and none of these things are you know, the status quo is that everything has to be scientific and it must all be able to be observed and written down on paper, and it's a load of hogwash. Well, let me tell you that the military are involved heavily in psychic cognition, if you like, and they use people who use something called telesthesia. So they call it in plain language remote viewing. So it's the ability to go into a hypnotic state and to remotely view events and things that will happen either in the present or in the near future or in the distant future. Another name for it is telesthesia. And they use this all government secret military operations are using people who do remote viewing. Okay, when they are investigating unsolved murders or robberies, who do they call? Psychics. Because they have access to knowledge that is not available to the police force. Then there's telepathy, and I have telepathy with my mother. Much as we have conflict, and much as she has damaged me, and she is herself damaged in many ways, we still are able to communicate telepathically. I will have a thought, or I will think something that my mother is thinking and phone her, and I'm right on cue. And we call it supernatural, and some of you may have read that book, Supernature, quite a popular book about 20 years ago, and it seems as if these abilities that both animals and human beings have, they seem supernatural. And they may be, they may not be. Personally, I think that once we know more, it's all natural. It's supernatural, but it's natural. It's scientific. We live in a dome, if you like. We are as souls, we come into this physical body and we are constrained by it. And this is a very special experiment, if you like, in a way of being. There are definitely other dimensions that we are not able to access in our human body. There are parallel universes. Everything all the technology that we've developed, well, I know this is going to sound way out there, but again, it's to do with the military. The technology that is available to us at this time has been developed because of interaction with extraterrestrial beings who live in other dimensions, some of whom are benevolent and some of whom are not benevolent. And it's quite arrogant to assume that we are the only planet with human life forms in the universes. And so it is not something we can observe. I've never seen an extraterrestrial being myself. I would like to, but I am aware that there, for instance, let's just talk about radiation. Let's just talk about 5G that's being erected everywhere. Who discovered 5G? How do we know? You know, only a few years ago, we had 4G. When we started with cell phones, they were 2G. And it's the 2G denotes the intensity of the radiation that is being used to transmit messages. How does that work? You have a chip in your phone. Somebody Australia or Germany or the US sends me a message and it arrives on my phone. It's magic, but it's not magic. So it's the same with these abilities. They seem magical, but they're not magic. And part of the suppression of the human race has to do with suppressing the magic. There are monks high in Nepal and the Himalayas where sound, they understand the intensity of sound, and sound moves huge rocks, and they have parties. They had parties where they would use sound from special giant gongs to move rocks from one position to another. So there's a limitation to what we know. And coming back to midwifery, coming back to human beingness and knowledge and the ability to put that knowledge into practice. I think there's some things we have to remember as persons. So we have to look after ourselves. So my biggest mistakes in midwifery I have made when I'm tired. And one of my biggest lessons that I've needed to learn in midwifery is the ability in my life is the ability to say no. So you can have the extrasensory perception, but if you can't say no, you might get yourself into a lot of trouble. I'm going to tell a few stories from my own practice. The ability to say no, the inability to say no is a survival tactic from early childhood. I learned that in order to comply, or in order to survive with the parent I was given, I had to comply, even if I didn't comply underneath. And I'm afraid I've invoked people's ire in the medical profession sometimes, because I can look and sound as if I'm complying, but underneath I'm not complying. And they know I'm not complying because they're reading me too. And that comes from my inability to say no. I'm afraid to say no. Why? Because I might get hurt if I say no. And the other reason why I'm afraid to say no is that when my no comes out, it's a violent, aggressive no. And the last person you want to be violent and aggressive towards is the gynecologist and the obstetrician who's backing you up. So this has been a really important portal that's kind of opened to me in the last few years as I've physically become older and a little bit tireder and weaker, and I've had to confront this issue of saying no, or not saying no, and how to say no in ways that are acceptable to people, and how to communicate. Somebody else, I've watched people, so some people they say no with ease, but they do it smiling, and they don't have this angst that I have about saying no. And the ability to say no to one's clients as well. I'm a yes girl, people come to me for VBAC 1s, VBAC 2s, VBAC 3s, and I want to do the best for them, and I want them to be happy and to achieve their goal. And sometimes there's a feeling inside, and I don't listen to it because I'm not sure. because I'm not sure of myself. And because I don't know how to say no nicely to the client. So I say, okay, well, let's see, let's do this. You know, I had a client who she was a VBAC 2, and she wanted to have a third baby with me. And she was really hardcore. I sent her to Tygerberg for backup. She refused to go back. She dumped her gynecologist obstetrician within the last 3 weeks of the pregnancy because he refused to listen to her. She was adamant she was going to do this. And I just had this, you know, when I felt her uterus with my hands, and my hands are like my ultrasound machine, if you like. I felt her uterus and just got this definite, no, it's not going to work. The uterus itself, the muscle felt very, very thin. I could feel all the baby's body parts. And it's not the only reason why you wouldn't, you know, it's not a good enough scientific reason to say no to a woman who wants a VBAC. But the sensations were there in my fingers and went into my body and into my gut, and it just didn't feel right. And the day I went through to her, when I got there, she was fully dilated. The head was a station of 0, so level with the spines. It was really nicely in the pelvis. She had absolutely no urge to push, and there were no contractions. And we waited and waited and waited. And then at some point I said, well, do you want to try and start pushing? And she pushed for 2 hours. She got the baby down onto the pelvic floor, but she had no strength to get the baby down more. And I just thought, no, I can't do this anymore. I had known, but she had been so determined to have this VBAC and not be in hospital. And eventually I said to her, listen, you know, and at that point she was tired, and I think she was ready. I said, look, I can't do this. So you're gonna have to go in. I'm gonna have to phone your gynecologist obstetrician that you so unceremoniously dumped and humiliate myself, but I'll do it because, you know, you clearly need help. And I phoned him. He was furious. Oh my gosh, he was furious. Anyway, they went in, the doula went in with a client. I stayed at home to look after the children. And the obstetrician gynecologist agreed to take her on. I begged him. I just said, look, I can't send her to Tygerberg. It's too, she has a medical aid. I just can't do it. If I do, I'm scared for her life. And I don't know why I said that, but I did. And he took her on. He pulled the baby out with a vacuum extraction. So she got her natural birth. He did an episiotomy. And then he waited, tried to get the placenta out, and it wouldn't come, and she started bleeding. And then he got even more furious because now he has to, you know, he could have managed it at 2 o'clock in the morning by himself, but now he has to call in the obstetrician and all the other staff, theatre staff, to a private hospital. And that's one of the problems with a private hospital, is that there's no instant access. There isn't in a government hospital, and there isn't in a private hospital. Instant access is a fantasy. In a government hospital, you're going to wait 6 hours because there are 5 other people in the queue before you. And in a private hospital, you're going to wait 2 hours because you have to get everyone out of bed and get the theatre prepped and so on. So anyway, I'm at home with the kids sleeping, but not sleeping. I'm praying. I'm calling on all the angels everywhere because I knew it was going to be bad. I didn't know what, but I knew it was going to be bad. And I just called on the angels and prayed and begged them to be with her, that she would survive. I knew the baby would be fine. but I was worried about the mother. Anyway, he had to take her to theatre. He got her to theatre and he couldn't stop the bleeding. They couldn't even get the uterus properly, the placenta off the uterus. It was completely accreta per creta, so it was grown into the uterus. When the uterus was so thin, you see, there was nowhere for the placenta to comfortably attach to. So in order to secure itself, it grew into the muscle body of the uterus. And so she had to have a hysterectomy. And I think she had about 12 units of blood. She barely survived. She barely made it. And I went to see her afterwards, and she was so swollen from all this fluid that they pumped into her body. But she recovered. She recovered, and she was able to go home with her baby, not able to have any more children. It was really a very difficult situation. And I'm grateful to the angels and the energies for securing both of their survival. But the interesting things to me is, that learning curve to look back and to say, okay, why couldn't I express in the pregnancy what I was feeling? And why didn't I have the words and the persuasion to persuade this mother to take a different path? And it's not that she may have had the same problem, even if she'd had a cesarean, she may have had the same problem. In fact, she would have had the same problem, and probably would still have had to have a hysterectomy. And it's an interesting question, because sometimes you think, well, sometimes people have to go through what they go through. Maybe there was no other way for this woman to feel what she needed to feel in the course of her life, and maybe I was only allowed to know a certain amount of knowledge, or have a certain amount of perception. But it does make me want to improve my extrasensory powers, as well as my ability to put what I'm feeling into words. And how do we do that? Well, I've actually got ways. I think you need to go and do research. I think are we good for time? Are we nearly done? I'm going to stop here, because I think I've spoken enough, and open the floor out to anyone who has things to share. But I want to give you just a couple of things to look up so that you can start to do your own research. There's if you type in this title, it's an Oprah YouTube video. It's called Intuition 101, and 2 dots, and then developing your clear senses. And there's a very nice article about how to start. How to start by taking off your shoes and put your feet on the grass. Start by making time every day in a sacred space that you create to be with yourself. It's really hard. I've been trying it for years. I will sit in a quiet space and think I'm fine, and come out of the door and trip over the carpet and fall on the stairs. So I'm still trying. Sometimes I get it right now not to do that. And it's to do with the conflict inside myself, and the parts of myself that are still traumatized and not aligned with oneness and peace and harmony. So I'm very grateful for getting older, because it's definitely slowing me down. Then there's a website. It's https Ingo INGOSWANN.com. And he was a researcher.
Sorry, just say that again. I will also try and put them down for the group later. But yes.
Okay. In INGO, his name is Ingo. One word, SWANN.com. And he was a researcher and he was a remote viewer in government research projects in the United States. And he's written several books about remote viewing, among other things. Very, very interesting, and quite sort of, quite academic in his approach. So that's for those of you who want a more scientific approach. And then the other one I want to mention is EdgarCayce.org. And Edgar Cayce was a remarkable, remarkable man. They used to call him the sleeping prophet. So he would lie down, close his eyes, put his hands on his chest, and go into a trance state. And he had the ability to heal people from a distance. And he had no, I think he was a homeopath or a herbalist prior to becoming a visionary and a seer. He could also read the Akashic records. He spoke about previous civilizations on Earth and what's happened to them. And everything that you're being told in the world today by mainstream media is a lie. You need to know that. And you need to also discern what about medicine is good and what about it is not, because it is part of the same paradigm. And unfortunately, there are thousands of doctors at the moment who are not subscribing to the present status quo in terms of mRNA developments. And I'm purposely keeping my words very scientific. I would like to branch out, but then we wouldn't stop. And he also spoke about reincarnation and how the Bible doesn't discount reincarnation, but whatever was in the original writings has been removed, okay, by the Catholic Church in Anno Domino 200 and 352 or whatever it was, when the Catholic Church became the ruling or the dominant, don't know what you call them. I don't want to say religion, but maybe that's a word, but they were more like the dominant government of the time. And so there's this whole materialistic thrust of the dominant paradigm in Western civilization at the moment, which views mothers and babies as physiological machines that need to be controlled. And the problem with that is that the babies are then controlled from birth. That is why free birth has become more prevalent, and why midwifery and traditional midwifery and evolved midwifery and spiritual midwifery is so much more important at this present time, because those few people, the 1% or at the maximum 4% that midwives all over the world are serving, midwives and doulas, I don't want to leave the doulas out, and doctors, like yourself, Gori, we are preserving, we are conscious of the spiritual element in humanity, and there is no other way to be. We are part of the cosmos, and the cosmos energy is part of us. And we have souls that are infused in our body. And when our bodies die, we continue in another form. Some of us have to come back into new bodies. Some of us are evolved enough. I'm trying, but I don't know if I'll get it right. I'm very attached to this world and how beautiful it is. I suffer a lot in this world. And I think a lot of us are suffering, especially the more sensitive and clairvoyant people will always suffer more because it's harsh. There are many harsh things, and we can be thankful for each other and for the technologies that make our lives easier to withstand the elements. And the purpose of this moment is to encourage you to develop your perceptive powers and to stay on track with spiritual birth and spiritual midwifery, with the element of receiving the soul and protecting those people who operate in this way. I want to thank you for listening, and I'd like to open the floor and hear what you have to say.
Wow, thank you, Marianne. I think we're all just reverberating a bit, and I think we should just carry on and not have a break. Is everyone fine? We can just flow into questions and comments. If you need to have a break, of course, go and get your cup and whatever. Let's just carry on. I don't want to break it. Does anybody have any immediate responses they'd like to share or feel into it? Just speak up when you're ready.
I actually do, because so much resonates. Resonates with what Marianne is saying. But one of the things that is coming up for me is a deep sense of gratitude for a journey that I haven't appreciated before. Before I started this course with Gori. And that is, Marianne, you said, well, how do we get back in touch with our precognitive senses? You know, take your shoes off, get into nature. And my beginnings, I always thought were, for a long time, I thought that they were a disadvantage. I was brought up in the bush in Zambia, very, very remote. I didn't have shoes. Had to save my one pair of shoes for the whole year and only wear them to Sunday school. Those kind of things that we thought were disadvantages. And then being in the birth field where there was no mechanization. It was birthing in villages and you only had your senses to rely on. But because I was straddling two worlds and in the Western mindset as well, I thought that I was at a disadvantage because I hadn't learned enough and so in coming into the Western model in hospitals, I was shocked by what I saw, but at the same time, I thought I had to be inoculated into the system because I needed knowledge that I hadn't been given. And now I've gone on this course with Gori and I've realized that everything that I had learned before and having gone through craniosacral therapy training, the biodynamics, and so deeply moving into that place of felt sense, that is everything that is needed. But I had to do that whole journey of coming back and realizing and truly appreciating the value of being in a community where we had nothing, and yet I now understand the value of it was everything. It was everything. So speaking into the senses, the felt sense of what a midwife needs to develop and that those are the most important senses to have in truly connecting. And like you were saying, you knew when you were feeling this woman's uterus, your hands were giving you the whole story. They were giving you the felt sense. But we've been trained to continuously move outside of that felt sense. And yeah, it's just in this moment, deeply appreciating having had that straddling, which was so difficult for me for some time. I'm now appreciating those very humble roots and what they were truly, truly teaching in the sense of what birth really is. So thank you. And you spoke beautifully, Marianne, very engaging. I just want to listen to you for hours. Thank you.
Can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Yes. I just want to come on and really share how inspired I feel right now. I've been listening to you with such a big smile on my face, and I'm in Vietnam. I've been living here for a few years, and I'm gonna go to the Netherlands soon to give birth to my first baby. And
Wow.
yeah, it's been a journey, but I think you really inspired me to keep developing these senses, as you say. I'm a psychologist. I was educated in a very Western scientific approach. And I think living here has really helped me to do exactly that, to put my feet in the sand, in the ocean, and connect more to my senses, which I often feel when I have a session. So thank you for being so vulnerable, so openly vulnerable about that, because I think that is what I really missed when I was educated as a psychologist, that everybody pretended to not be human while we are trying to help humans. So I really felt that from you, and I appreciate that.
Thank you so much for sharing. The image came to my mind of a box. You know, you're a psychologist, and in psychology we taught that it's almost taught that the human is a box, you know, and as long as you can unravel the wires inside and connect them into the right what do you call those little things? Cars that you put in cars, it's fuses, correct? Can connect them to the correct fuses, then everything's going to be all right. And real life is a bit different.
It is, and it's interesting, you know, the right and wrong thing, as you say, what you struggled with to do the right thing when you feel something is wrong is what I found very much with my clients, is that sometimes people have to go through whatever they're going through, no matter how bad that seems. And I feel a lot, I sense a lot in my body. That's something that really discovered and developed over the last few years.
Right. And
to connect those two things and to trust the senses that I feel when I'm in connection with someone helps me with that, right? To realize that we really don't know what is right for someone and what is wrong, but sometimes it just is. So yeah, I was reminded of that again today. And this whole course, to be honest, Gori, also, I really want to thank you because it made me so excited for my birth. It was a big surprise pregnancy and I was quite afraid, but I'm getting very excited and empowered. So thank you so much for that. That's very valuable. Thank you.
Does anybody else want to share something that they feel ready to share now? I'm going to go ahead because I have a question. When I finished medicine, I left several times, but I also finished. And I finished my yeah, I had to do everything else in between, birth babies, save midwifery. So when I finally finished my community service in 2013, in July, I joined Marianne. It was the most natural thing to do with my 4-month-old baby, was to shadow home births now that I got medicine out of my way, and kind of really tried to acknowledge science. I decided that it was not what was the best thing for birth and midwifery and women having babies and babies being born. So I went to shadow with Marianne to really learn what needed to be learned to come to that space to support women during birth, which is what I wanted to do. And I wasn't going to study midwifery. I wasn't going to become a doula. I wasn't going to do that diploma in obstetrics. That was way off what I thought was needed. So I did a Sula course to connect with the soul of the baby within the mother, and to help the mother connect with her own unborn baby. I did that course, and I shadowed with Marianne to unlearn everything that was stopping me being able to support a woman. And that was wonderful. And I so much wonder in that, and so much going through my process and coming back to that stage. And now I'm in a stage where I'm wanting to teach a sacred model of birth that I have thought very deeply about for the last 10 years. But I found myself befuddled. And it took me a lot of time and the people in my course did this process with me a bit, of really, when we came to labor and birth, what did I want to teach the women who are going to be supporting births? Midwives, doulas, mothers, whoever, it doesn't matter, all that stuff. Women. Found myself so indoctrinated to think, how am I going to set up the clinical space for women who haven't done pelvic examinations? Because now suddenly in my whole philosophy of birth, I needed to teach women to do pelvic examinations in case they need to do, you see, you keep questioning yourself in your question. So I stood at this quadrant of people from a very different ways of life who I felt were simply projecting and channeling. They were on my course because they were on my course, not only because it's cheap, I hope, but because they didn't want the indoctrination of technology and all of that. But when we came to that space in that course to feel safe and confident, we felt like we needed to stand on scientific clinical skills. I'm still processing and figuring this out. And I've just put it in a quadrant that says, yes, those who are interested and feel they need to know this, we'll do a retreat on it. To feel the tummy, yes, important to know all these things. But you're telling me, Marianne, the most important skill you had to save that woman's life was knowing your knowing. And that's what I'm trying to bring into my course, that you don't have to know all the clinical skills to feel like you can sit at a birth. But you don't have to be radical to say, I don't want to know them. My approach is you learn from your experiences and how it leads you, but you have somebody who knows always there, because you don't know when you want to reach out to that person that knows. And that's kind of one way I've tried to support that gap people might feel in a clinical skill. What do you feel about that and teaching, you know, in the New Earth midwifery model? We're going to need to tap into our intuition and have that.
The thing is, you know, we need to start with practical things. You know, an 18-year-old or a 20-year-old, when I first went into midwifery, you know, you think you know everything at that age, but you only realize how little you know 20 years later. So you have to start somewhere, and can teach gentleness and respect and come to the practical teaching from a holistic perspective. And I think, you know, that's a good basis for any learning that's going to take place. The next level is more difficult, and I don't know how one can teach it. It's the knowing your knowing. And I have worked with people who have an air of knowing, but don't know they're knowing. And that's quite dangerous. So you have to, first of all, you have to know yourself. You have to feel everything. You have to be able to cry. You have to be able to rage. You have to be able to understand the feelings as they come up and down from your base chakra up to your third eye and beyond. You have to understand, you have to, perhaps not, you don't always understand it, but you have to be bringing it into consciousness constantly. So that when you are at a birth, you are aware of what in you is yourself. Because what happens in birth, and this again, this is a psychological term, but it doesn't exclude the spiritual, is transference. And the transference is hugely or largely from the mother and from the baby to the midwife or to anyone else who's in the room. And what ordinarily happens is that the father is there, he's beside himself with anxiety, he's also transferring. So now the midwife, who's the receptacle for all these transferences, has got to try and tease out within her body whose transferences she's dealing with at any one time. And she's got to know the difference. So that's the knowing. If you're picking up a transference, or are you picking up a medical issue, a medical problem? And that will also come in. So that is like clairsentience when you're with somebody's body. So that knowing that I had about her uterus, that was clairsentience. So there are so many influences that a midwife has to try and tease out within herself. And I'm going to talk about an example here. I had a client who was in labor in the water, in the bath, and she was very desperate towards the end of her pregnancy and towards the end of the birth. And I was sitting next to her, her husband was supporting her, and I just had this knowledge, this feeling that she was really angry with me, And I just sat with it, and I thought, well, okay, I'm not angry with myself. I'm not angry with the client. I can see she's struggling and so on. And she's angry with me, and I'm a big girl. It's okay. I can handle it. She's not my mother. I'm big enough and strong enough to sit with this anger and rage that this client is feeling towards me. And I sat with it, and she eventually had, the next day we debriefed. I was so angry with you. She said, I wanted to bring out, I knew you had a magic wand somewhere, and you were supposed to bring that magic wand out and save me. And I said to her, okay. And how were you born again? And she said, my mother had a cesarean section with me, and I was in great distress. And my mother told me that the doctor's scalpel was like a magic wand, because he just cut me open and out you came. Wasn't that incredible? And so we were able to work through her. Not only did she have a baby, she was also rebirthing herself. She was able to make the connection to the trauma that she had experienced as a child, and the savior who had saved her from harm by using a magic wand. And when she made that connection, you know, her whole face just lit up, and she was, wow, that's amazing. I was, wow, that's amazing too. So, yes, sitting with the feelings at a birth can be very hard for the midwife. And it's about knowing your knowing, as you said before, knowing what is you, which part is you, which part is transferences from other people. And I was very confident. I was very confident that she could do it. I was confident in the ability of the baby to come through the birth canal and to be born. The baby believes that he's doing it. And that's what you want. You want a situation where the baby absolutely knows that he gave birth to himself. And the mother absolutely knows that she gave birth to her baby. And they're both right. And in that process, the baby is empowered and the mother's empowered.
I welcome some more feedback, any. Yeah, as Shasta's saying, that the modern obstetric system doesn't allow the baby to participate in their birth.
Yes, that's exactly right. And that the babies in hospital are robbed of their autonomy, especially with a cesarean section.
Does everyone naturally feel that a baby has his own autonomy? We certainly don't act like it in society. Neha's in India. It hugely discounts the capability and autonomy of the mother and the baby. Yeah. If we can just accept that the baby has autonomy.
So that's it. I feel encouraged to ask my mother about my birth when I speak to her next time. Who's that? Marguerite. Who? What's that name? Marja.
Manjari Priya's in Germany.
Okay.
From Lithuania, who I met in India.
Right.
It's this autonomy part is so relevant also here in Vietnam, because it's actually interesting. I was at my friend's free birth at home last year here in Vietnam, because I think the cesarean rate here is 70% where I live. Like they really just take away the whole process, and she asked me to be there, and I really had to get over my own fear, and it was in such a time where I really developed my own connection, and I felt so strongly the power of my own intuition. And now I'm extremely grateful for this, because going into my own birth, I am flying back to the Netherlands because I'm very lucky that I found a beautiful midwife that can be there, which is, home birth is even illegal here in Vietnam, actually.
Sure.
Yeah, and it just shows so much how the system has changed, right? Me as also as a healer in my own way, like the psychology field here is also very disconnected. But I never thought about you just asked that, Gary, right? Do we naturally feel the autonomy of the baby? I felt very strongly that the mother, my friend, and then me now also have to have this experience, but I didn't think about the baby's perspective. So I'm happy now that that is
so the
brought to my
baby,
attention.
so the baby is a healthy baby. A baby whose placenta is still functioning, who's grown well in the womb, should be active, right? And can be active, really active, right until the time of birth and afterwards, obviously. They move in utero. So a mother will say, you know, or I'll say to the mother, the baby's moving, and she'll say yes. Or she'll tell me the baby's moving, then I know the baby is fine, and I don't need to always intrude with a dop tone or a fetal monitor to find out how the baby is, because if the baby's moving, the baby's definitely fine. And the baby gets into position in the womb. In the pelvic girdle, baby has to position himself to fit nicely. And every woman has a different shape, size of bones and pelvic girdle, and the way the muscles are attached and the ligaments and the tendons. So, you know, for a baby, it's actually quite a mathematical operation. Plus, he's got to manage his arms and his shoulders. And then he's got to also manage his feet. And babies actually push themselves out. I've felt babies pushing again. If I have my hand on top of the uterus, you know, to check whether the mother's contracting or not, I will feel the baby pushing against the wall of the womb to push himself out. Quite incredible. And I've had some very active babies who kind of give this sort of last real strong push with the back legs, and then the baby will come. But sometimes, you know, babies need assistance too. So that's where the midwife, the important thing is to be in tune. The three people present at the birth, the mother, the baby, and the midwife, need to be absolutely in tune with each other, because, for instance, if the baby is very large and the shoulders get stuck and the baby needs assistance, then it's the midwife's job to help that baby to be born, and to do it without harming the baby, with the mother's cooperation. So it can also be quite tricky. That's why I'm a bit nervous. I'm not nervous about free birth. I had a free birth myself. In fact, I could have popped all three of them out alone. But and most women who choose free birth will usually be healthy and are capable of doing it. But I just think it's safer to have a midwife. You need someone with a watchful eye. You need someone who can resuscitate the baby if necessary, and or the mother, you know, because birth is unpredictable. So I'm not a complete, you know, I'm not a hardline free birther, although I did free birth my second baby by choice.
The funny thing for us, who we support the whole spirit of free birth, of course, because that's who we are, but we also are who we are. So automatically, as soon as you show up at a free birth, it's not free anymore. So what is a free birth? Can we support a free birth? I think Marianne supports a free birth. You were behind me in my birth. I had a midwife at my birth, but was my birth unassisted? No. I was leaning on your legs in my birth. So it's just a play on words, actually. Of course we support free birth. And of course
I like to say undisturbed birth.
Yeah.
Because a midwife can disturb a birth, or she can protect the birth so that it's undisturbed.
That's nice. I like it.
I'm just a bit skeptical of some of the rhetoric and the philosophies of some of the stuff I see on the free birth websites. It doesn't make me feel safe.
I think discernment is very important right now. I think discernment, what does Neha say?
Yeah, discernment.
In
India, home and free births are very looked down at as a bad choice, not just in India, everywhere. Mainstream considers this as something that stupid and poor people do. Right. We are so far from this kind of true empowerment. We have wiped out a traditional midwifery wisdom over the last few decades. I feel sad, hopeful too, but also sad. Yeah. Yeah, it's difficult for medically trained midwives to collaborate with the traditional wisdom and to find a way to weave them into a collaboration with each other. Because I don't want to be, I don't want to be losing mothers and babies, you know. I mean, it's a wonderful story to watch a baby giving birth in the river and not touch her and not help her. It illustrates issues about resources and so on, but in this day and age we have the technological resources to save mother's life, and I don't want to be responsible. But on the other hand, hospitals can be dangerous places too, and I've acted on many occasions. I have acted at home in ways that were quite strong or painful for either both the mother or the baby, and in that way have managed to save lives, which I get then questioned for not taking them to hospital soon enough. But I don't know. I think that I'm just thinking of a recent case where I had a placenta. The mother wasn't healthy, although we didn't know why, and the placenta got stuck, and I had to make a decision. Do I remove this placenta 45 minutes away from the hospital where she's booked? Do they know how to triage a patient properly? I'm white, she's white, we're going into an African hospital, and given South African history, you know, there's all sorts of dynamics at play there. And then the other hospital was 5 minutes away, but same question. She probably died before she got seen to. So I made a decision, and that decision was to remove the placenta in the surgery in the clinic where she gave birth, and then give her antibiotics, and she recovered. She recovered completely. Yeah, very, very hardcore decision to have to make. But at the same time, if you're in a very rural area, you're going to make that decision without blinking twice, because there's no ways I'm going to put someone in a car and travel 6 hours to hospital if the placenta is still inside or she's bleeding. Yeah.
Have you ever
We
had to
went-
do, sorry,
Have we ever had?
have you ever had to do something that you have not felt trained for at a birth?
Well, the first time I removed a placenta, sure, that's
Yeah.
a horrible thing. But you do it once and you save someone's life, and then you think, okay, I'll keep this knowledge for the next time I need to use it. And maybe you need to use it once every 5 years, you know, but that once in a 5 years is going to save that woman's life. And it's something that all midwives should know how to do. And all midwives, I mean, antibiotics, you know, antibiotics save lives. And I'm not such a fool that I am not going to get hold of some or prescribe them or phone a doctor, you know, to get hold of antibiotics. I mean, women used to die of puerperal fever. It was common. I don't want someone on my watch dying of puerperal fever. So I'm into Western medicine when I need to be. I am, you know, I can't not be. And I don't know, I'm not traditional enough that I know enough about things like yoni steaming or preventing puerperal infection. But I think in that kind of society, you know, if the mother doesn't make it, she doesn't make it. And you have the baby, and life goes on. And that's how it is in nature. You know, if the mother can't give birth to her cubs or she's old and she gets an infection afterwards, that's her time. That's her time to die. Maybe she's had several litters of pups. You know, and the thing is, we because of agricultural industry, because we have turned from hunter-gatherers into agrarian pastoralists, if you like, and agricultural peoples, because of the large growth in population. You know, we do animal husbandry, and you know, we breed animals, and breeding horses in the racehorse industry, it's, you know, it's not like humans breeding. And I know this sounds a bit fascistic, and I'm struggling with how to, you know, make it right. But in the racehorse industry, you don't breed dud horses. You just don't, because they're not going to make it on the racetrack. And there's thousands of rands. The minute they drop to the ground, they're worth 500,000 rand, you know, and so it goes. And so you breed, you know your lineage. You know your lineage way, way back to the first Arabian horse that became a sire. You know the lineage of the dam, and you pick the genetics. It's precise. It's really, really precise. And it's the same with cows, with sheep, not so much with goats, because the traditional African way hasn't been so precise, but the goat breeding farmers do the same, and they make a lot of money because they breed goats for specific things. It's like dogs. Dogs are bred for specific things. So, you know, genetic modification, it's so much a part of our living, and it is going to, in the future, apply to humans. And I hate to say that. I hate to say it, but it has to. You know, it's so that's, I don't know how it's going to pan out, but I had a vision many years ago that there would be a future where parents were chosen, look, they're already growing babies in pods in the laboratory. That's already happening. And they are already cloning different genetic structures. So it's already happening. But my view is one that is more in line with my spiritual path, if you like, that we have to move toward some more control over procreation, more consciousness over procreation. And we're talking about conscious procreation here. The majority of the population doesn't procreate consciously. And that is an issue. It is an issue because people just randomly produce babies just because they can. And because they're sexual and because the earth is fecund and it's everything revolves around procreation. We have to come to a place where parents are conscious before they procreate, and where having 1 or 2 children is the limit, and where those children are conceived and born in a high state of spiritual awareness and consciousness. And the vision that I had was of a room with a bath in it, where the husband and the wife are absolutely and utterly trained in every possible way. They are completely conscious, completely centered, and they bring this baby into the world, and it is untouched. But on the side of a one-way glass screen, on the other side of this one-way glass screen are your professionals, and they are there to assist if needed. If they are called, or if they see that something it needs assistance, they will then ask permission to enter and will be entitled to enter. But it's a kind of a pod where the couple have consciously procreated this child and will consciously give birth to this child, and they do it alone. And that was just such a profound vision for me, and I haven't seen it. I haven't been able to create it here where I am. And it's still there. It's in my, I don't know whether it's maybe in the future. I'm not sure that I'm going to be around to see that future. But it gave me a lot of hope, and it gave me a lot of encouragement for the future, that there will only be ever a small amount of people who are spiritually advanced, who are spiritually conscious. And when things happen, cataclysms that may happen in the future, and we're gearing up towards a cataclysm in the not too distant future, possibly not in my lifetime, possibly after my passing, because our solar system works in cycles, and it's got nothing to do, what the cataclysms that are man created, and the whole idea that we are damaging the climate, in my view, is nonsense. Cataclysms happen because things happen elsewhere in the universe, and the biggest reason at the moment is the sun. The sun releases solar flares and releases magnetic energy, which then affects the earth and causes change, bigger change. So, my view is to get out of the city. People need to get out of the cities. Those who think they're going to survive need to get out of the cities and need to find a place on earth where they can survive self-sustainably and self-sufficiently. And there's a lot of people doing that. There are a lot of people doing. There's a huge movement. So I can't talk about birth without talking about all the other things that make sense to me in my spiritual paradigm. life on earth is meant to be. We are meant to be here. We are creating, co-creating a beautiful future. And so this is all part of that. And that is my intuition. I don't know how I'm going to do it yet. I'm struggling to find a way. My children are all in the Northern Hemisphere, and so I'm really compelled to want to go and live somewhere in the Northern Hemisphere so that I can be closer to them and see them more regularly. I love living in South Africa, but it's just a distance, and I really am afraid if the powers that be lock down our capacity to travel again, it's going to put the kibosh, as they say in Afrikaans. It's going to limit our capacity to travel. Yeah, I think that airplanes are on the way out. If anything, travel in maybe by 2050 is not going to be in power-driven cars like electrical cars or oil cars. We're going to have to find some more form of energetic travel, free energy travel. Sorry about my dogs. They're making a noise. I think I've spoken a lot, enough, and it's all around intuition, about developing our spiritual awareness, knowledge from extraterrestrial spheres, creating with this form of light energy a beautiful life and a beautiful future, and co-creating more beautiful human beings. And I really believe, I pray every time I'm with a baby, that a baby being born, that this baby will bring in more consciousness than we have had up to this point. And even if it's just the parents, I'm working with someone now, she's due this week, well, she's actually due next month, but we think she might have the baby early. And she, as a young woman, as a younger woman, before she got married and fell pregnant, she was a heavy drinker. It's from trauma that had happened in her childhood. And she smoked heavily in the first pregnancy, and she was able to stop, to gradually, during the course of the pregnancy, she was able to bring it down gradually to 10 cigarettes, then 5 cigarettes a day, then 3 cigarettes a day, and she subsequently ceased smoking. And she's just amazing, you know, and they consciously made this baby, and she's really trying to be present in the pregnancy. And yeah, I'm really encouraged when I see people, just ordinary folk, making a huge effort to bring in a baby with more love and more consciousness than they themselves were brought in with. And I think that's our role as light workers, our role as midwives, our role as birth keepers, our role as doulas and as mothers. We've collected around, created, and we are
my computer froze just the last few words you said.
We are the torch bearers.
Yes.
Thank you for letting me hand some of the flame to you. to take
Oh,
your world.
no, Marianne, you don't get off so lightly. Would you like to finish off by telling us, I mean, I don't know so much about it, but I'd like to hear just a couple of words about about the offering, if you're ready to share it, that you
yes,
have
for sure.
created. Maybe we can end off with that. It would be lovely.
So midwifery for me has been my life, and partially trauma driven, partially wholeness driven, and it just kind of matched with who I was. You know, I love the little babies and I love the mothers, but it also is from my deepest perspective about me healing myself. So every time I can be the channel and facilitate more consciousness in a mother and a baby and birth them, because it really, you know, I've had, it's not about the mode of birth. It's not about whether you have a Caesar or a natural birth, although obviously I'm a natural birth midwife and I don't recommend Caesars unless they're necessary. But I've had amazing experiences where women who have had cesareans have taken huge leaps in knowing, in consciousness, because of the cesarean. So knowing and consciousness is a separate, you know, it can come in through many different experiences. And mine is, you know, it's about healing the mother and healing the baby. I was the baby. I am also the mother. And my mother needed healing. And I knew that from in the womb. So a mother who carries a lot of trauma and carries a baby in her womb, that baby knows the mother better than she knows herself. And for the last 15 years or so, I've basically been my mother's psychotherapist, which has been very hard. Not to mention my own psychotherapist, in between finding another mother for me to mother me. And so mothering mothers and mothering the babies has been a way for me to, in the reflection of life, and the bigger reflection of life mirroring itself to me, has been a way of healing myself and healing the planet. And so if I've been through all these difficulties as a midwife, you know, all the things that a midwife learns and what she has to encounter and the people she has to communicate with to keep it safe for the mother and the family, you know, you think you're just helping this one mother give birth to a baby until the tribe walks in, and the tribe are all the parents and the grannies and the aunties and the uncles and the brothers and the sisters who also want to have a bit of the glory of the birth. And then you just realize, oh my goodness, you know, I forgot about the tribe. No wonder it's happening like this and this and this, because the tribe, you know, it has got influence. So it's learning all these different things and the difficulties of being in the moment and sometimes not knowing what to do, you know, or being at a birth and you're alone and you need some advice and you think, who shall I phone, or who can I WhatsApp to ask this question, or I'm feeling anxious about this particular thing at the moment, I need to talk to someone. And so I've started this group called the Midwives Kin, and it's a paid group. I've come in at a very nominal rate of $3 to join the group. And the whole idea of the group is that midwives need healing too. and midwives need guiding too. And especially if you're alone out there doing home births and water births, and in rural areas, and even in a city can sometimes be the loneliest place, because you're like, oh my gosh, I have to go, I have to source backup, you know, and how do you do that without terrible anxiety about what you might meet when you get there, etc., etc. And just to provide a platform where people have access to me and a few founding members, and can share things. They can share things with each other confidentially. They can be anonymous if they don't want to be named, and they can ask for advice, and they can book private Zoom sessions, and we can support each other, a place where midwives can really be heard, because there are one or two groups on Facebook, but midwives are not heard. We are not heard because we are just midwives. And midwives everywhere, all over the world, are working under really, really difficult conditions. You know, in the UK, they had a strike and a demonstration the other day, and they're striking. In fact, down at the hospital here at Gray's in Pietermaritzburg, they're striking because the conditions that midwives are working under are horrific, and they get bullied. The really sensitive ones, the really good ones, the ones who understand water birth, or understand that a mother wants to do this, get up on the bed or squat or whatever, they are the ones who are bullied, who support the woman in the hospitals. So it's called the Midwives' Kin, and I am presenting it on Facebook under my page, which is Marianne Littlejohn, and then my other page is Spiritual Birth, and then you are sent an invite link, so it's by invitation only once you've clocked into the Stripe page. Stripe is a private payment platform. So I have a Stripe account, and if you tap the link, you'll get a little box, which then you fill in, and you put your card details and your CVC number, which is that 3-digit number on the back. I'm going through this because I've had a couple of people who get panicked when they have to do this kind of thing, and they think it's dangerous, and they know they're putting their email there, and how dangerous is that? So I'm just explaining it so that you understand that it's a safe way. And then I get an email from Stripe telling me that you've paid, and sends me your email address, which I can then send the invitation to. And it's to try and keep it safe, and also a way for me to ask for your legitimation, so some kind of certificate or degree, or proof that you have practiced as a legitimate midwife. Going to have to get something from the traditional midwives, because I don't want to exclude the traditional midwives, but it has to be somebody who's got a degree, a certain degree of experience and training and education. So 9 months with birth keepers doesn't quite cut it for me. And it's to keep the midwives safe. You know, a midwife who's qualified and is registered and who has a degree from the UK, not going to feel safe with people who don't have the degree of experience that she has, or the training. So that is why I have created it this way. And it's out there for all the special midwives who want to join. It's trickling through. I have a few founding members, and two amazing midwives who I've met at the Midwifery Today conferences, who are founding members now, and yeah, that made me really excited and honored that such big names in the midwifery world have joined.
Well, that's very, very exciting. And honestly, I'm very glad that you've created this finally, because we just need more ways to hear your voice.
Aww.
And just hearing you today made me just feel like, now I know why there's parts of how I practice and see midwifery that I love so much and are so unique, and I feel so just divinely guided that I was able to connect with you. I lived around the corner from you when I was first pregnant, and so you were literally just a few roads away from me, and I'd walk back from university and come down to your house on the way home in the beginning and then afterwards. So I just look forward to more and more ways. You've got such a wealth of knowledge, of practical experience, clinical experience, you know, just the amount of perspective and weight in a very tender but beautiful but strong way you carry, because you reflect everything so personally. And I've just seen so much of your work in action, you know, like at all times of the night, tripping over the dog. I get it all. You know, and I feel so happy to have had that space with you, and that I could invite you here. And it's just feeling more like sitting in a lounge and chatting with you than on a webinar, you know, whatever this is, summit, whatever course. And I think everyone feels like that. And so I want to hear more, because I know you've got so much wealth on every single like small topic, as we can even see. So I'll be joining your midwifery kin also.
Oh, that's exciting. That's so exciting.
Yeah.
Thank
You know,
you.
it takes time to come to a point when you realize, like, oh shucks. And you look at your phone and you look around your life and what it's filled with, and you realize, oh my God, who's supporting me?
Yeah, absolutely.
Everyone's sharing love and saying goodbye. So we're going to share love.
Yes, I can see that.
Thank you for all
much.
your time, everyone. Thank you for a beautiful session.